I want you to imagine, just for a second, standing right at the exact intersection where hardcore traditional mathematics completely collides with, like, bleeding-edge artificial intelligence.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a pretty intense place to stand right now.
Right, because, back in 2008, a few bad mathematical models pretty much almost brought the entire global economy to its knees.
Totally. Trillions of dollars just, well, vanished.
Exactly. Vanished. Because the systems that were designed to measure risk completely failed to see the cliff we were driving over.
Yeah, they were looking the wrong way.
And today, I mean, the financial industry isn't just relying on bigger or better math to prevent the next crash. They're actually preparing to hand the steering wheel over entirely to autonomous AI.
Oh, which is, I mean, it's the single most terrifying and thrilling shift in modern finance, honestly.
Right. But what happens if that AI decides to hallucinate?
That is the big question. We are moving from a world where humans just use algorithms as tools to a world where algorithms are the actual agents making the decisions.
It's massive. And the people building the guardrails for this transition are carrying the weight of the global economy on their shoulders, literally. So, welcome to the deep dive.
You'll be here for this one.
Today, we are tracing the absolute bleeding edge of quantitative finance. And we're doing it by looking at the professional dashboard, the research profile, and really the entire career of one specific individual.
Ratanlal Mahanta.
Yes, Ratanlal Mahanta. He's a senior quant, and his work over the last 13-plus years is basically a roadmap of how Wall Street went from traditional stochastic modeling to deploying these massive AI-driven risk ecosystems.
And just to give you a quick sort of 30,000-foot view of his output, because we're pulling from a massive stack of sources today.
That's a huge stat.
Yeah. He has over 350 citations, an H-index over 9, and he has published more than 15 technical books.
Which is wild for someone actively working in the industry.
It really is. But we aren't just here to read a resume. We are looking at his research to understand a very specific mission. His entire body of work kind of revolves around one core philosophy, which is model risk is hidden risk.
Model risk is hidden risk. I love that. We are definitely going to keep coming back to that.
Yeah, it anchors everything he does.
Because whether you are a casual observer,
Yeah.
Or maybe someone prepping for a fintech interview, or just a regular person with a 401k or a mortgage.
Which is most of us.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
These invisible mathematical models are constantly operating in the background, literally deciding your financial fate.
Every single day.
So, okay, let's unpack this. To understand where finance is going with AI, we first really have to understand the massive, complex infrastructure that keeps global markets from collapsing right now.
The foundational stuff.
Yeah. Looking at the sources, Mahanta spent from 2019 all the way up to 2026 as a senior quant, specifically lead level L4 at RSRO. And his primary mandate there was building enterprise-scale model validation and risk frameworks, which to me sounds like installing massive earthquake shock absorbers in the foundation of a financial skyscraper.
That is actually a perfect analogy, because it sounds incredibly dry until you realize what those frameworks actually do. I mean, what's fascinating here is that when a bank holds billions of dollars in assets, they are constantly exposed to unseen forces.
Like what?
Oh, a sudden war, a supply chain collapse across the globe, a pandemic. Mahanta's job was to build the systems that calculate exactly how much damage those events would cause to the bank.
Okay, this source material mentions some heavy acronyms here, and I want to get into them. We've got FRTB-SA, IRRBB, and CVA.
Yeah, quite the alphabet soup.
Seriously.
Yeah.
To a layperson, I mean, it's just letters. So I want to understand the mechanics here. What do these systems actually do? Why are they so critical?
Let's strip away the acronyms and just think about a city's water infrastructure.
Okay.
You don't just build a reservoir based on how much water a city drinks on an average boring Tuesday.
Because that wouldn't be enough.
Exactly. You have to build it to withstand a 10-year drought, maybe a massive population spike, and a sudden contamination event all hitting at the exact same time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That is essentially what FRTB-SA is. It stands for the Fundamental Review of the Trading Book Standardized Approach.
FRTB-SA. Got it.
Yeah. After the 2008 crash, global regulators got together and created these strict rules called Basel III. They basically demand that banks hold a massive buffer of capital, like a financial water reservoir, so they literally don't go bankrupt when the market panics.
So Mahanta's models, these are like the sensors in the reservoir, constantly calculating how much water needs to be held back just in case.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. And what's wild is that the math involved is insanely complex.
I can imagine.
Let's take IRRBB interest rate risk in the banking book. A bank makes money by, taking in deposits and loaning them out.
Right. Simple banking.
But what happens if interest rates suddenly spike, like we've seen happen recently?
Yeah, everything changes.
Right. Suddenly, all those old loans the bank gave out at low rates are actively losing them money, while at the same time, they have to pay higher rates to their new depositors.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a squeeze.
So Mahanta developed these massive simulations to calculate what they call earnings at risk. Meaning, if the central bank raises rates by 2% tomorrow, how many millions does our bank lose by Friday?
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the sheer computational weight of that. You can't just plug what if interest rates go up into an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, no, not even close.
How does he actually calculate that exposure across, thousands of different exotic loans, derivatives, and international borders?
Well, you don't use simple algebra for that. You use Monte Carlo simulations.
Okay, I've heard that term thrown around so much. What is a Monte Carlo simulation actually doing under the hood?
Think of it like playing out a million alternate universes of a single chess game.
Okay.
If I move my knight, you could react in maybe 20 different ways. A Monte Carlo framework doesn't try to just predict your single most likely move.
It doesn't.
No. It uses heavy computational power to mathematically play out every single possible reaction, and then every reaction to those reactions, millions of times over.
Wow.
Yeah, it gives the bank an actual statistical probability of survival across a million different realities.
That makes a ton of sense. So when the source material talks about CVA, credit valuation adjustment, that's just another one of these multiverse calculations.
Yes, exactly. But specifically for counterparty risk.
What does that mean, counterparty risk?
Imagine you buy fire insurance on your house. You feel totally safe.
Sure, I've got insurance.
But what if a massive wildfire burns down the entire city and the insurance company itself goes bankrupt?
Oh, then my insurance contract is worthless.
Bingo. CVA is the bank constantly running simulations to ask, what is the statistical probability that the guy on the other side of this multi-million-dollar trade goes bankrupt before he pays us?
Man, and Mahanta is building the pipelines to calculate all of this. Like, he's writing the C++ and Python code to run these millions of simulations, ensuring they are entirely audit-ready for the Basel III regulators.
Delivering audit-ready pipelines, that's the key.
It is literal structural engineering, but with code and stochastic math. Which, actually, this brings me to something in his profile that genuinely confuses me.
Oh, what stands out to you?
Here's where it gets really interesting. If I am a high-level quant, right, and I have spent years figuring out how to build these incredibly complex, highly proprietary risk engines and trading algorithms,
Yeah.
I am locking that code in a vault. I mean, algorithmic alpha, the whole way you make money on Wall Street is all about having a mathematical edge that no one else has.
Traditional Wall Street wisdom, yes.
So why does a high-level quant spend the better part of a decade writing literal cookbooks that give away the recipes to anyone with a laptop?
You're looking at his work with Pact Publishing.
Yes. Between 2015 and 2023, he publishes over 15 technical books. We are talking deep instructional manuals here.
It's a staggering amount of output.
It really is. He puts out a book on mastering scientific computing with R in 2015. He drops machine learning with R cookbook in 2018. Then he moves to a Python for finance cookbook in 2020.
Yep.
He even writes a guide on cryptocurrency trading algorithms in 2023. I have to push back on this. Isn't he just handing the playbook to the opposing team? Why arm everyone with the tools to compete against you?
It seems totally counterintuitive, I agree. But you have to understand the crisis of opacity that was just choking quantitative finance at the time.
Opacity, like nobody could see what was going on.
Exactly. Models were becoming absolute black boxes. A bank would essentially tell a regulator, hey, don't worry, our proprietary algorithm says we are totally safe, but nobody else could actually read the algorithm.
Because everyone was coding in their own secret proprietary mathematical language.
Exactly. Or they were relying on super clunky, closed-source legacy software. By publishing these frameworks, Mahanta wasn't giving away his specific trading strategies. He was handing out the dictionary and the grammar rules.
Oh, I see.
He was standardizing the underlying plumbing.
Okay, so if we use the water reservoir analogy again, he isn't telling people where his secret water reserves are hidden. He's just teaching everyone how to build a standardized pipe so the health inspectors can actually check the water pressure.
That is the perfect distinction. It connects to this bigger picture concept of reproducible research.
Right, which is a huge deal in academia.
It's huge. In science, an experiment is worthless if another scientist can't replicate it. Mahanta recognized that finance needed to be treated like a hard science.
Yeah.
By teaching the next generation of quants how to use Python and R to evaluate financial data, he elevated the baseline of the entire industry.
Because if everyone understands the baseline tools,
Then, when a bank claims they have a brilliant new risk model, the regulators and the broader quantitative community have the shared language to rip it apart and verify it. It builds a much more robust, standardized ecosystem.
I get it. True innovation can happen faster when you aren't reinventing the wheel every time. But here is the fascinating kind of unintended consequence of standardizing all that code.
What's that?
Well, by giving everyone the Python pipelines to process financial data, he essentially accelerated the timeline where humans became the bottleneck.
Oh,
And the
absolutely.
data started flowing so fast and the global markets became so incredibly intertwined that human analysts literally couldn't keep up anymore.
Which triggers the next seismic shift in finance. And really the next phase of Mahanta's career, the handover to artificial intelligence.
Yes, we see this pivot in the sources starting right around 2024. The Python cookbooks kind of stop and the academic papers on machine learning take over.
Yeah, there's a clear inflection point.
He presents this research at IRMC in Milan on using large language models for corporate credit scoring. And then by 2026, his entire conference circuit is dominated by a new phrase. He is keynoting at the Google Cloud India Summit, AWS Summits in Mumbai and Bengaluru, the MATLAB XP.
Big stis.
Massive global summits. And the topic is almost always the same: agentic AI and financial AI. So what does this all mean?
This is where we cross the frontier from traditional finance into the total unknown.
I need to understand what agentic AI actually looks like in a scalable quant ecosystem. Because when most people hear AI, they just think of a chatbot, right?
Like ChatGPT.
Exactly. They think of typing a prompt in and getting a polished summary of a quarterly earnings report. Can we just talk about Wall Street banks replacing human loan officers with faster chatbots?
Absolutely not. A chatbot is purely reactive. You give it a prompt, it gives you text back.
Oh.
Agentic AI has agency. It is goal-oriented and autonomous. In the context of these massive enterprise architectures, powered by AWS or Google Cloud, an agentic AI isn't sitting around waiting for a prompt.
So what is it doing?
You give it a high-level objective, something like, optimize our exposure to the European energy sector while maintaining a strict low-risk profile.
And it just figures out how to do that on its own.
Yes. The agentic AI will autonomously scour global news feeds, read the latest corporate filings, check shipping logs, and satellite imagery of oil reserve.
Wait, really? Satellite imagery?
Oh, yeah. It ingests all that real-time pricing data from the market, runs the Monte Carlo risk simulations we talked about earlier, and then dynamically executes the trades to rebalance the portfolio.
That is insane.
All in a fraction of a second without a human ever clicking a mouse.
That is absolutely staggering. It's taking the credit scoring research he presented in Milan and scaling it to real-time market execution.
But wait.
If the AI is reading unstructured data like, say, analyzing the tone of a CEO's tweet or a central banker's speech, and then making a mathematical trade based on that, how do you prevent it from making a catastrophic mistake? I mean, neural networks are famous for finding patterns that don't exist. They hallucinate.
You have hit on the exact vulnerability that Mahanta is actively trying to solve.
Yeah.
Handing the keys of global finance over to autonomous agentic AI introduces a terrifying new vulnerability.
So how does he address it?
He addresses this with his 2026 research on a hybrid deep learning framework.
Okay, how does a hybrid framework fix the hallucination problem?
Well, the future of quant finance isn't letting deep learning neural networks completely replace traditional math. The AI is fantastic at intuition. It can read 1 million unstructured documents in a second and sense a market panic before it happens.
Right, it sees the vibes of the market.
Exactly. But AI is tangible at rigid boundaries. So the hybrid framework integrates the AI directly into those old-school, stochastic pricing engines that Mahanta spent his early career building.
So, the AI is like the engine driving the car at 200 miles an hour, but the traditional math is the reinforced steel track keeping it from flying off the cliff.
That is exactly the architecture. The deep learning handles the complex, messy reality of the world, while the traditional frameworks provide the strict, verifiable rules for pricing and stress testing.
I see.
If the AI wants to execute a massive trade based on some rumor it found on Twitter, the stochastic math engine acts as a hard limit. It calculates the exposure and literally blocks the trade if it violates the bank's safety reservoir.
Which perfectly brings us back to the core guiding philosophy that anchors all of this discussion. Model risk is hidden risk.
Always comes back to that.
Because giving an AI agency to trade billions of dollars introduces a level of hidden risk that is almost impossible for a human brain to comprehend.
It changes the fundamental nature of reality in the financial markets.
That sounds incredibly philosophical, but looking at the sources, they completely back you up.
They do.
Mahanta presented a paper in 2026 at IIM Calcutta called Making Facts by Design: Data, Models, and the Authority of Numbers in Contemporary Institutions. Let's unpack that phrase, the authority of numbers. What does it actually mean for an AI model to create a fact?
This raises an important question about how much power we give these systems. Let's go back to his research on credit scoring.
Okay.
If an agentic AI system reviews a medium-sized shipping company and decides, autonomous of human input, that they are a massive credit risk, it lowers their score.
Right.
Because that AI is highly advanced and deeply trusted by the bank, that score is treated as an objective fact. The bank denies them a loan.
And because they don't get the loan, they can't expand their fleet, their revenue drops, and they actually become a massive credit risk.
Yes. The AI didn't just measure reality, it dictated reality. It made a fact by design.
Wow.
When models gain that level of authority, the risk isn't just that the model makes a bad prediction. The real risk is that the model reshapes the world to match its own flawed logic.
And if you scale that up to the global market, the implications are honestly terrifying. If one bank's AI dictates reality, what happens when every major bank on Wall Street is running a similar agentic AI?
You get a phenomenon that Mahanta explored in another 2026 paper, which focused on systemic risk and stress testing. The specific mechanism he warns about is called endogenous liquidity amplification.
Okay, I am going to need an ELI 5 explain, like I'm 5 on endogenous liquidity amplification. What is that?
Sure. Endogenous just means originating from within. Liquidity is the ability to easily buy or sell assets.
Right.
So imagine a scenario where there is a minor dip in the housing market. Nothing catastrophic at all. But one massive AI system sees this dip, calculates a worst-case scenario, and starts aggressively selling off mortgage bonds to protect itself.
Okay, and then the other AIs in the market see that massive sell-off.
They see it, they analyze it in milliseconds, and they assume the first AI knows something terrible that they don't. So they start selling too. Suddenly, you have a cascading loop. The AIs are feeding on each other's panic. In a matter of minutes, liquidity totally dries up. Nobody is buying. Everyone is selling.
A minor market dip has literally been amplified into a full-blown systemic crisis.
Exactly. Entirely generated from within the AI ecosystem itself.
So the models themselves become the source of the hidden risk. The shock absorbers become the earthquake. How do you possibly regulate that? I mean, you can't just subpoena an AI and ask it why it panicked. It's a black box running billions of parameters.
You cannot regulate an AI after the fact. You have to put a leash on it before it acts.
Right.
And this is where Mahanta's dual expertise becomes crucial. At the exact same time he's exploring these AI risks, he is presenting highly complex mathematical research on nonlinear stochastic differential equations with applications to derivative pricing and regtech.
Regtech meaning regulatory technology.
Yes.
So how does a nonlinear stochastic differential equation actually act as a leash on an AI? Mechanically, what is happening there?
A stochastic differential equation is a way of modeling complex systems that change randomly over time, like stock prices or interest rates. But the key is that these equations have strict mathematical boundaries. They define the absolute limits of probability.
Okay.
In a regtech framework, you run the AI's intended decisions through these equations in real time.
So the AI says, I want to sell everything right now because I detect a panic.
And the stochastic equation catches that command before it ever goes to the market. It runs the math and says, based on the fundamental laws of probability, this level of panic is a hallucination. Executing this trade would violate our regulatory capital requirements.
Wow. It acts as an unbreakable mathematical fence.
Exactly. The AI provides the speed and the insight, but the traditional math guarantees that the outputs remain verifiable, bounded, and audit-ready for regulators.
It is the ultimate safeguard. You use the oldest, most rigorous forms of calculus and statistics to tame the wildest, most unpredictable neural networks. Looking back at this entire deep dive, the arc of Mahanta's career is truly fascinating.
It really is a mirror for the entire evolution of the industry.
It is. I mean, we started by looking at a quant building the foundational C++ and Python shock absorbers FRTB and IRRBB, ensuring that banks held enough water in the reservoir to survive the next drought.
Yeah.
Then we saw him completely refuse to keep those tools a secret. He wrote the cookbooks. He standardized the coding language for the entire sector, essentially solving the opacity crisis and making reproducible research possible.
Which inadvertently laid the track for the AI revolution. Because once the data pipelines were standardized, the sheer volume of information demanded autonomous systems to process it.
Leading to his recent pioneering work in agentic AI and large language models, showing how autonomous systems can execute high-frequency trades and assess credit by synthesizing global data in real time.
Right.
But he doesn't just build a machine, he builds the brakes. He acts as a philosophical guardian against the AI, warning us that these models create their own facts and amplify their own panics.
And he counters that threat by tying the AI to the rigid mass of stochastic differential equations. It is a brilliant, really delicate balance between the desire to scale intelligence and the absolute necessity of mathematical accountability.
As we wrap up this deep dive, that tension between intelligence and accountability leaves us with a lingering question.
Yeah.
Something for you to ponder as you watch your own investments or apply for a loan in this increasingly automated world. We're moving rapidly toward a financial system where agentic AI is the new standard. These systems will be capable of executing trades, predicting global events, and creating economic facts faster than any human can even comprehend. So who is ultimately held accountable when a hyper-complex financial model inevitably hallucinates a systemic risk?
Yeah.
If the AIs tomorrow start speaking a language of risk that is completely untethered from traditional stochastic math, will they become too complex even for the elite quants who originally built them?
We're building systems that learn. The real question is whether they will learn to protect the market or simply learn how to outsmart their own guardrails.
It's a reality we are all going to have to navigate. Keep questioning the models, keep looking for the hidden risks, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.